Now, joining us in the studio today, we have with us Dr. Bong Young-shik from the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies. It's great to have you back with us today.
Pleased to be here again.
So, Pompeo went and came back from Pyongyang, and we sat here last week, we discussed a few things, but perhaps we didn't think it would go quite as badly as we expected. We expected some things to come out, but it seems like Pompeo got very little out of it. What is your assessment of Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang?
Well, Secretary Pompeo would not agree with your assessment. He said that he had many hours of productive conversation with his North Korean partners, and denuclearization itself is a very complex issue. And he said he was very proud of his negotiation team. But I'm inclined to agree with you that the talk failed to produce any breakthroughs. Maybe that was not intended the purpose or the original goal of Pompeo's team, because this is, as they themselves describe, a first step toward a long journey, which is the complete denuclearization. So he described the conversation and negotiation as constructive and made in good faith. That means that they must have clashed on many of the key issues because of huge differences. That's why Secretary Pompeo described many hours of the negotiations constructive and in good faith. Means that they at least tried to hold on to minimum level of mutual trust that they were negotiating in order to pursue mutual benefits. But we have to wait and see. It seems like the United States negotiation teams were very clear about the scope and terms of their demands. In the trilateral press conference with his counterpart, Foreign Ministers of South Korea and Japan, Secretary Pompeo emphasized that the North Korean negotiation teams, including Mr. Kim Yong-chol, did not push back when they explained to the North Korean government officials about what complete denuclearization and the U.S. demands meant. And North Korean team, according to Secretary Pompeo, did not challenge that denuclearization, of course, would require thorough inspection and verification. So we have to wait and see how much detailed outcomes have been accomplished during his trip. And there will be another trip or meeting between North Korean government official and Secretary Pompeo.
But then what do you make of North Korean state media's comments after Pompeo left Pyongyang? They said the meeting was regretful and the US were gangster-like. That's quite aggressive language, considering Pompeo said it was made in good faith.
Well, it was made in good faith and the constructive in terms of United States negotiation team did not shy away from very clearly and specifically explain to the North Korean team what would constitute the minimal requirements for North Korea to receive the benefits as a quid pro quo of United States making concessions. So it must be very disappointing to North Korean government, but it was substantial progress in terms of the United States government patching up some holes left after the summit meeting in Singapore between Chairman Kim Jong-un and President Trump. So if devil is in details, then this meeting was very beneficial to the Trump administration in terms of tightening the screws to deliver very clear message what those details actually are.
In the North Korean state media report, it specifically talks about establishing a peace regime on the Korean peninsula, and that was what was reached at the Singapore summit. Does that suggest that North Korea wants declaration to end the Korean War first before they take steps towards denuclearization?
According to the content of that statement, North Korean government seems to prefer that. But there's some strange tweets in that statement because North Korea was not really sanguine about declaring the end of the Korean War without clear presence of China. Although Kim Jong-un agreed with South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the Panmunjom Summit meeting on April 27 that it is a common goal of both Koreas to declare the end of the Korean War by the end of this year and it remains as the ultimate goal for both governments. But China was the main variable here because Chinese government made it really clear to three governments, US, North Korea, and South Korea, that without China's presence in that process, China will not endorse any changes with regard to the current situation based upon 1953 Armistice Agreement, arguing that China has lost 190,000 lives and 360,000 Chinese voluntary armies got seriously injured. So China has a legitimate right to get invited to this process to declare the end of the Korean War and move toward the replacement of the 1953 Armistice Agreement with more sustainable peace agreement. So there was a position, a new position of the Xi Jinping government since April this year. Previously, it was the United States prodding China to assume more direct responsibility. President Trump himself initially urged Xi Jinping government to take charge because North Korea is an issue that China must be responsible for. And China was backing off that nuclear North Korea is the issue that the United States must assume responsibility for. But after the summit meeting between Kim and Trump was announced, the Chinese government made a 180-degree change and said that China, quote, is a directly relevant party of the Korean peninsular issues. That was the statement issued by the Foreign Ministry of China in April. And even the Chinese newspapers ran an editorial with a comment on the idea of US and two Koreas declaring the end of the Korean War, an idea that is particularly laughable. So it is not so much about North Korea, but China that has been opposing this idea of declaring the end of the war. So rather than North Korean government protesting to Washington that you do not make any progress with regard to the declaration of the end of the Korean War, but North Korean government has to make a protest, same protest toward Beijing for the delay.
So you agree with Senator Lindsey Graham in the US that China is perhaps putting the strings behind North Korea's attitude at the moment?
Well, China's fingerprints are here and there. One, like the statement that China should not be dismissed in this progress to replace the Armistice Agreement with, or declaring the end of the Korean War with a more sustainable peace treaty. Two, China had already declared in the immediate aftermath of the US-DPRK summit meeting in Singapore on June 12th, in the form of a press briefing by the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry, that there is regulations and agreements in the UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea that if situations will change, then the members of the United Nations Security Council would make important changes with regard to the applications of the existing economic sanctions on North Korea. Basically, China was alluding to North Korea that we are behind because we hold the trump card when it comes to changing the degree of the economic sanctions on North Korea. So it is up to China whether China will remain in economic sanctions on North Korea until North Korean government is going to make important step forward toward the denuclearization, or China is going to dilute the pressure of economic sanctions for the sake of protecting North Korea.
Pompeo, after he left Pyongyang, came to Tokyo, and then he went to Vietnam on Sunday, where speaking at a business forum, he called on North Korea to look at an example of Vietnam as an example of how cooperation with the US has ended up in prosperity for the nation. He said he told them to tell North Korea to, quote, seize the moment, and that the miracle could also be theirs. The US seems to be dangling this economic prosperity carrot, if you may, in front of North Korea. Is that what North Korea wants? Will Kim Jong-un bite?
Is that what North Korea wants? Yes, but at the right price to pay. Pompeo and President Trump have delivered the same message to Pyongyang over and over again. Secretary Pompeo once compared North Korea to South Korea, that if North Korea agree on denuclearization, then North Korea will be the next South Korea, the shining example of economic prosperity. And Secretary Pompeo also reminded North Korean government officials that United States supported the Marshall Plan in Europe, the reconstruction of post-war Europe. And Pompeo now compare Vietnam to the future of North Korea. So you're right. United States government has been busy reminding Kim Jong-un and North Korean government officials that there is a huge carrot, not just carrot, but all kinds of vegetables that North Koreans covet if North Korea is going to take important steps toward the denuclearization. But unfortunately, North Korean government has not made that bold strategic decision. So that's the positive message, dangling the carrots of economic prosperity, but negative message to the same effect has been reiterated by 3 foreign ministers in the joint press conference on the 7th, right, in Tokyo, that they all repeated the same message, that unless North Korea denuclearizes, economic sanctions remain in place. Foreign Minister of Japan Kono, Secretary of State of the U.S. Mike Pompeo, and Madam Kang Kyung-hwa, Foreign Minister of South Korea, all made the same statement. Unless North Korea moves, the economic sanctions will remain in place. So it is up to North Korea.
Isn't there a risk at the moment, though? North Korea's reaction was quite aggressive, just shortly before we go. Isn't there a risk that North Korea ends up pushing back too hard? For example, Trump last time, he threatened to just walk out of the summit. Isn't there a risk that he's playing with, North Korea playing with fire a little bit? Unpredictable nature of the Trump administration?
Right. Definitely, North Korea is playing a dangerous game, playing with fire, and it's we have to wait and see how Trump administration will respond, because Trump administration will not be outsmarted by North Koreans when it comes to playing with fire or playing the game of uncertainty. So who knows? There might be a surge of tension on the Korean peninsula, at least in the short term.
Fascinating. Thank you for coming in today, as usual, and sharing your insights with us.
You're welcome.